Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm Daniel Torres, and when I'm not hosting this podcast, I'm the Director of Executive Search at Dwyer Partners, where I recruit top talents in consumer and retail globally. And guess what type of people we speak here with? Exactly, it's top talents, leaders, and luminaries in the consumer goods and retail industries. We're now over probably 180 episodes in by the time this goes out. So do go into our website or your favorite podcast platform to entertain yourself and be educated with some of the industry's top voices. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, where you'll join a community of 15,000 plus members and counting. Remember, we are part of a family of podcasts. Our sister podcast is the CPG Guys, which covers everything in consumer goods at the other side of the Atlantic, so in the US. So do tune into the show, which is also going out on a bi-weekly basis. Interestingly, in the same time days as ours, on Wednesday and Saturday. So today we're gonna travel all the way to Asia to see how FMCG is doing over there, what's going on there. We know about Europe. We have all kinds of interesting things going on, but what's going on in the roaring Asia? And I couldn't be better accompanied by my co-pilot, Christina Nicolaou, on this flight. Hi, Christina, how are you?
Hi, Daniel, doing very well and very much looking forward to the conversation around Asia.
I know, I think is it the first time you and me talk about Asia on the pod? Could be, no?
In the wider sense, yes. We've done a little bit around India, right?
That's true. So now we're going a bit further east. That was just the layover. What's your perspective on Asia? Like if you think about Asia in consumer goods, do any thoughts come to mind?
When I was working in a global role, it was around e-commerce, right? So Asia was clearly a completely different world, and it was like a glimpse in the future. So that was where we're aiming to go on what was happening there and how the consumers were behaving when it comes to digital. So in that sense, it's quite ahead of Europe, but there are a lot of different things when it comes to the structure of the trade and how the route to market is different compared to what we are used to at our side of the world. So it's in a big sense a different world and a little bit of where we're hoping to go. So a good mix for discussion.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit of a microcosmos, sometimes when I see it from here, like just a whole different dynamic. So I think we couldn't be better accompanied today by really somebody that's an expert in the consumer goods in Asia. It's no other than Sid Pathak, who's the head of consumer industries practice Asia Pacific at Kearney, one of the world's main management consulting firms. So hi, Sid, how are you?
Daniel, Christine, pleasure to meet you. Doing very well. How are both of you?
Very good. How's Singapore? You're in Singapore, right?
I am traveling all over the place, but yesterday I happened to be at the Kearney office in Singapore.
Happened to be at home for once in your life?
One or 2 days every week. Yes, I managed to be in Singapore.
I hope you like flying as much as we do. So, Sid, tell us a bit about your career background shortly. Like, what led you to your current role at Kearney?
Sure. So just a quick introduction. So currently I am a senior partner with the firm. I'm based out of Singapore. I lead a consumer and retail practice. So we'll talk about that. So very happy to do that. As part of Asia Pacific, I look at all Asia Pacific in the true sense geographically. So India, Southeast Asia markets, Greater China, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Korea. I'm an engineer by background, MBA, so no surprises. A large number of us in consulting come from that. Started my career with Kearney as a summer intern in 2008. I was on a project in Singapore, loved the profession, loved the lifestyle, loved the travel, loved the exposure. So got addicted to the profession, joined the firm full-time in 2009 as a young consultant in India. Stayed in India for 3 years, grew up the ranks, moved to Singapore in 2012. It's been 12 years since then, so time has flew by, but the experience has been remarkable. And now in the role that I currently lead, I get to experience multiple things faster. The tougher part of consulting, of doing the grunt work, is a little over for me right now, which is great. So the learning has been great for me.
Tell us a little bit more about your role, Sid. So what is it that you're currently working on? What does it mean to be heading the consumer industries part at Kearney for Asia?
Yeah. So look, Kearney. Kearney is a global management consulting firm. Consumer industries and retail is one of our largest practices globally. So my role is threefold. One of my role is client facing, is how do I ensure that our network of clients in Asia get to see the best of the firm in terms of topics, learnings, challenges, and challenges that they see, capabilities. So that's the first thing that I'm responsible for. And this is a team effort. We have a great group of partners that I do this with. The second is internally, how do we orchestrate ourselves to make sure that we are on the cutting edge of the consulting firm? One of the biggest issues in any consulting firm is we need to be moving at a faster pace than our market is, because our clients are asking us not problems of today, but also problems of tomorrow. So that's a role that I also play. And the third is I have stayed very true to my own clients and my own consulting work. So a lot of time gets spent working with them, solving their problems, leading projects and leading engagements, which keeps you on the edge. Otherwise, there is always a risk of being an administrator, which is something that we in Kearney don't believe in. I personally don't believe in that. So that's what I do. Christine, our topics range across the full spectrum of the client's problem. So we see ourselves as consulting partners who help our CXOs, boards, identify, solve, and deliver problems. So we deliver transformations. And so consultants like to describe them with topics. I don't prefer to do that because it could be anything that the board is faced with. But in terms of, if you were to use the traditional definition, strategy, commercial transformation, operations, supply chain, cost, cash, sustainability, digital analytics, we end up doing the full spectrum of work, Christina.
No, that's great. And you're right about like being a bit hands-on. Of course, you have to do like the higher levels, client stuff and so on. But yeah, if not, you're just too far removed from the work you're getting engaged with, right? And you can't really like give your opinion on things at the end, which is exactly why we have you here, right? So,
Daniel, one of the things when I was a younger consultant, Kearney had this wonderful phrasing of brilliantly practical. And then it seems like a buzzword, but as I've spent time, you get to realize that it's very easy for smart consultants to be intellectually brilliant. You can come up with the most brilliant solution, but in our words, things happen when they can be led on the ground. And that's about being practical. But you can't just be practical, because then you will start compromising. So this fine balance of, how much brilliance can you push and where does practicality come into the organization is something that's been a great motto for us in Kearney and for me personally.
Yeah. No, and I think that that's a good differentiator. Let's leave it at that. But a lot of like you do across APAC, but a lot of your work has actually been specifically in Southeast Asia, which to me, and we were talking with Christina before, how we see Asia from a European perspective, if you like, it seems like a very dynamic market, but with a lot of highs and also some very steep lows. Is that the correct perception?
Yeah, look, any description of Asia by anybody will by definition be wrong, because it's such a complex market, right? Having had the pleasure, you work in a market like Australia, significant modern trade. You start going to markets in my parts of the world, significant still general trade penetration. We have wholesalers, distributors, we have populations which are in decline mode, we have populations which are growing, we have younger populations, older populations, we have one of the highest per capita incomes in markets like Singapore and Hong Kong in our parts of the world, but we also have one of the world's lowest income markets where we play. We have multinationals, we have local conglomerates. So it's very complex to define it, Daniel. But I think the best way to explain this is there is no one Asia. You can look at different parts of Asia and you can compare something with the US, something with Latin America, something with Brazil. So there is a lot of comparisons that you can start drawing. And I think this is where the complexity of Asia lies, is that for a large number of FMCG companies, especially those headquartered in the West, there is this desire, and rightfully so, to simplify the narrative and make it about an Asia narrative. And that's where you end up taking the middle road, which is neither perfect for both spectrum of markets. And that's some of the work that we do now. And I think as Asia has become larger, clients are also beginning to understand and ask a bit more, right? So now, earlier we would see Asia, then we had China and rest of Asia. Then we had China, India, and rest of Southeast Asia. And now we're getting into Indonesia and Thailand are slightly different. Philippines is a little different. And I think as the market becomes larger, that maturity in clients is coming. And I think that's what is needed for people to also understand and win in our markets.
And speaking of your clients, you're speaking with some of the top leaders in the consumer industry. I'm wondering what keeps them up at night? What is currently in their top priorities that they're discussing with you?
Look, growth, Christine, is the number one priority. I think if I just take you back a little bit and give you a quick time travel, right? Mm-hmm. If you were in Asia in the early 2000s, 2012s, the motto was, let's get into Asia. Let's get into Asia, a rising tide lifts all boats and we will make money. So it was a lot about, we want to get into Asia, how do we do it? So we were doing tons of market entry projects, right? Then over a period of time, as companies had entered Asia, and Asia started slowing down a little bit. It was still growing faster than many parts of the world, but it became a little slower. The discussion came to be, hey, we're not growing as fast as we thought. Where is the profitability? And so there was a shift between 2012, 2016 around profitability. And I remember co-authoring a paper at the Harvard Business Review, which basically pointed this out, that you can't just get everywhere and hope you'll make money. You need to focus. And we can discuss a little bit about that later. So then there was a period of, how do we get profitability? Then in 2016 and 2019, companies started restructuring a little bit, focusing. There were some companies that exited Asia, moved from a subsidiary model to a distributor model. But then digitalization also came in. And that gave companies another hope or another different direction. And so there was a big focus on digitalization, Christine, and you mentioned about the entire e-commerce push, unicorns beginning to come up. And then happens COVID. And that fundamentally disrupts everybody. In some ways, everything comes to a halt as companies trying to get out of COVID, focus gets on resilience. Then getting out of COVID, there is sustainability that's happening in parallel. And then there is resilience. So you can look at, in terms of the overall narrative, things have happened a lot very, very quickly, in which has confused many organizations on what are they trying to do. Because every time you come up with a 5-year priority, structurally things have changed significantly. So it's harder for you to stick to, what you did 5 years ago. But now if I look at it and I speak to, a large number of boards and CEOs, the number one priority is growth. I think many companies, especially MNCs, have found growth to be a little elusive. Projections haven't happened. And that is a struggle that companies are having. And we can go a little bit about growth, but for me, that's number one, is how do we get growth in a sustainable, comfortable fashion.
And
the second is,
sorry, go ahead.
The second was around end-to-end cost and profitability. For the longest time, consulting firms do a lot of zero-based budgeting programs, cost takeout programs, productivity improvement programs, call it whatever you might wish. But in Asia, for the longest time, there was a belief that Asia means prudence. We think twice before we spend, and therefore we must be doing it right. But this is not about negotiating better. This is about structurally thinking what your cost structure is. That maturity is now beginning to come in. We are seeing clients being willing and open to discussing what should my fundamental cost structure for a growth of this nature, for a price point of this nature, for a competition of this nature be. The third then is, Christine, to your point on digital AI, a lot of money has gone in, a lot of interest has been garnered, has been pushed, but has it really helped deliver tangible outcomes? Not really. But it still remains exciting. So there's a big dilemma right now that clients are facing is, take Gen AI now. Do I go all out? Will it result in something? I can't not do it, but I don't know what to do with it. And therefore, how do we play that game? The last is talent. This is a market where there are great opportunities, in most ways, a younger talent market, lots of opportunities for talent. how do we attract them to an FMCG profession? How do we make it interesting for them? And what does it mean in terms of operating model, future career roles? Is the fourth discussion that we would be having. There is a long list, but for me, these are the 3 or 4 that I at least engage the most with my clients. So,
and you mentioned one thing at the beginning, which was like there was a point where companies went from subsidiaries to distributor model, some of them, because we know that there's a bit of everything. Specifically on that dynamic, where are we? Because we know that there's some very strong, like DKSH, for example, very, very strong companies specialized in distributing FMCG products.
There is no one answer, Daniel, across Asia. In fact, right now, I'm currently solving the exact problem for one of my clients. So I have first-hand, very live market visit, market views. I think the way to think about this, Daniel, is there are a couple of points. One is there is an industry structure. So if you were to look at a market like Thailand, large wholesaler, large convenience store markets, there are markets like Indonesia, which may have $3 to $4 million general trade outlets. So in some ways, your route to market needs to follow your end trade. There is also a scale factor. When you're a very, very large company and you have local pull, you can afford a slightly different route to market structure versus what you would do if you had lesser scale, in which case you need to rely on a distributor. And then, Daniel, to make things complex, there is also different kinds of distributor structures. You have companies like DKSH, which where companies use one distributor in some ways to cover the entire market. We have companies in Indonesia who are using 500, 600 distributors to get to the same number of outlets, right? And their idea is, the more entrepreneurial, the more depth, the more specific market nuances, the better they become. Plus, we can control them tightly. So this remains a legacy debate. But I think one thing that I can tell you is the local players, the local conglomerates have stabilized their route to market. I fundamentally believe route to market is a choice. There is no absolute right or wrong. It's about how you play that game with everything else. But I think MNCs have been a little unsure of route to market, and therefore there is a bit of revisiting. I think the local players have been a little better at it. They have a handle of what they're doing, and they're just doubling down and maturing what they have a bit better.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about growth as one of like the number one priority for GMs or CEOs right now. Why has it been elusive for FMCGs after the COVID boom? And like sustainable growth, you mentioned sustainable growth. Is it attainable in a short-term thinking world, especially for public companies that are going like quarter by quarter?
Yeah. So I think if you take the growth lens, you need to break down where the problem happens. Is Asia growing? Absolutely. Is emerging Asia growing? Absolutely. So the market growth is not the issue. It might be a little slower. It might be a little faster. Inflation will come in and go. Those things happen. But structurally, fundamentally, is Asia or emerging Asia at least poised to grow? Absolutely. I think what is happening is who is benefiting from that growth? Now, earlier, in the absence of e-commerce, in the absence of, an e-B2B sort of models, innovation capital availability being difficult, a few companies were able to penetrate trade better and make the most out of it. What's happening now is there is greater kinds of competition that is beginning to come up. And therefore, how do you capture where the entire growth is coming from is becoming difficult. So take the consumer lens first. Consumers now want slightly different things. And therefore, are you able to come up with new innovations quicker is something that legacy large companies have not really done well. So without taking names, look at the top 10 of the world's largest FMCG companies and ask yourself, how many new killer brands have come up in the last 10 years? Not that many, right? But look at new companies that you now start seeing in shelf space, not just in my part of the world, but even in yours, there are many new. So there is ability to target consumers with the right portfolio now that consumers look for different things has been a little challenging. Competition has become more aggressive. In my part of the world, very clearly local players are now beginning to outperform the MNCs at a slightly higher pace on an average, give and take. So it's not that the market isn't growing, the market is growing. I think the question is, are we best placed to capture growth from an MNC standpoint? Perhaps not. Some are doing a really good job, but many of them are now beginning to struggle. Now, the complexity is, how do you solve this? Because it is not just a tweak on pricing. It is not just a little bit of a tweak on route to market. You're looking at taking a fundamental relook on how do you win in this part of the world. And that is a complex shift for companies which are too large to make for any market, because you do not play in Indonesia for Indonesia necessarily. You might have an Asia-wide strategy. You're looking at capital investments across the entire world. Whereas if you're competing with a local Indonesian player, where it's the third generation, this is where their heart is, this is where they live, this is everything for them. They are playing the game for that country at that moment of time. So faster decision making, ability to take large capital calls relatively quickly. There is not a lot of long strategy projects that need to be done before you take a call. These are quicker decisions, and I think that's something that MNC companies are beginning to now think of as, how do we do that, and how much? And it's also a question of how much you can do that, because there are structural and there are some strengths for sure that come with a large brand, but there are also market realities that they're faced with now.
And do you see these companies being able to adapt? Because there is it usually comes with a big structure, as you mentioned, processes, the kind of a weakness when it comes to getting a really big ship to turn.
Yeah, very right, Christina. I think I'll put it in two ways. There is a large spectrum of MNCs. There are some very, very large ones. For many of them, listed entities in a market, these are multi-billion dollars market for them. There are others who are on the smaller spectrum. I think for the ones that are on the smaller spectrum, it's obviously hard. You will not have an R&D facility for many of these markets. You'll try and look at your global portfolio. So there is a little bit of, where do we play on the periphery conversation. I think for the large ones, yes, they are beginning to make those attempts. I think many of them are beginning to get it quite right. There are some others that still need to go a little further. But what I'm happy with, this realization of, let's talk about Indonesia when we're discussing Indonesia. Let's not generalize and say, how do we solve for Southeast Asia? I think that maturity is beginning to happen. And that when that maturity happens, then it's easy, your chances of being able to win is a little higher, because now you're talking specifics. Otherwise, you're talking slides and charts and groupings and archetypes. But that's not how you play in the market. You play in the market every store by store. And I think that maturity is happening. It will still take some time, but it's all in the right direction.
And let's go back a little bit to digitization that you mentioned before. A big part of the struggle is, what is the right investment for me? How it's going to pay off? What is it that we have seen based on your experience so far? And where do you see this part going?
Yeah, look, I have a strong and sometimes slightly controversial view, so bear with me as I share that. I don't think the problem is as complex. What is digital? It is a way or a path of addressing the business needs that you have. So simply put, identify a business problem, figure out how you should solve it, process, governance, tools, data, intelligence, get the right solution. If you have it, you take it. If you don't have it, you get somebody to make it, and then you implement. You can measure KPIs because you were solving a business problem, so you know if it's gone up or down. I think in reality, what happens? Now, this is easier said than done. I think in reality, two things happen. One is the driving force behind digitalization is not clear across companies. In some companies, you have the head of IT who might be wanting to push digitalization in IT. And so now it's a solution lens. Is there a solution that I have a solution? Can I give it to you to solve a problem? So it's a solution looking for a problem. In some cases, you have the CEO saying, let's do digitalization. So now let's do something. Are we solving a real business problem? We're not sure, but we need to do something because the board is asking, what are we doing on digitalization? So in some ways, it has resulted in the correct approach, which everybody appreciates, doesn't necessarily get done. And also there is a lack, Christine, in some ways, of digital maturity or understanding in the leadership in our markets. Not everybody is on the same picture. I've still had clients who've come and said, I went to the store and I thought we should reduce the price of this product by X. And I took that call and see my sales have gone up. And my digital team, after all the analysis, could not recommend that. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about a belief that intuition in some ways also works. So I think there is a little bit there's a little bit of a how to decide what to invest in, where to invest, etc. challenge, which then increases the problem because it's very hard for you to know whether we did right or wrong. Because what were you trying to solve for in the first place? Sorry. The second is that I think, like all of us who are on social media, and I'm guessing the two of you are quite active as well, you end up playing for the galleries. You start believing that my audience, like all of us do, we post something on Instagram, we want to know how many people have liked it. So now I post something on LinkedIn and I want people to like it. So what do I start doing? I want to be the first one that's done something on Gen AI. Because now I'm playing for likes. I'm looking for what's next for me. Because ultimately, many of the leaders, barring conglomerates or family-run businesses, have a career, have a profession. So I know that my seniors or my board is looking at what am I doing. So now let me post a sustainability report. Let me post a digital video. Let me make a video of how we are transforming something. And so you start playing a little bit for the gallery, as against really thinking of what am I trying to solve. And this is where sometimes it's very interesting to contrast family-run businesses who are winning in large parts of the world, and you look at their social media push versus other set of companies who are pushing on social media, and you see this tremendous contrast. And I think it's something that as leaders, we need to be a little conscious of. I think there is a risk of us getting biased because we're trying to cater to an audience which is giving us immediate likes. Our battle is fought in the boardrooms with our shareholders, is fought with our consumers in the marketplace, with our competitors. And that's the true measure. And I think sometimes we end up missing, digital for our consumers versus digital for social media. We'll start giving you slightly different answers.
If you were to summarize it, Sid, you would say that it's about starting with a business problem which I have on my hands. I'm trying to solve this, and here's how digital is helping me, and not vice versa.
Absolutely. Christian, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example to bring this to life, right? And this is we started this work with the client, and I love the client. Very clear business problem first. I don't care about what the project topic is. It was started as a digitalization program. He said, business problem first. The client had a sales force that takes orders from a large number of general trade outlets. Now, you will know this, Christine, quite well. The order that you take, you ideally want to convince the outlet owner to take the right order. Not push an order, but to take the right order. And what is the right order? The number of SKUs they should carry and the quantum of SKUs that they should carry. What was happening was, in a very large sales force, you rely on the sales force's own capabilities to be able to sell. A great negotiating skills person is able to sell more. Somebody a bit more lethargic will sell less. Now you can spend tons of monies on training. Iteration is very high, and this is a vicious cycle. In the earlier days, there was no way to solve it. So you train people. Then somebody came up with a basic algorithm and a logic. Multiply, something with last stock minus some, backroom stock, last order, and you get to some answer. Quite basic, not accurate. Nobody used this. And the CEO gave us a simple problem. Can AI solve this? And his point was, it should not be difficult to decide how much order an outlet should place, because the number of data points run into millions every single day. Every single week where order is taken for every single SKU, we have enough data points and we know the patterns. So we sat down, and right now there is no digital team involved. We sat down with the client's sales team and said, what do we think are the 20, 30, 40 parameters that drive sales? 2 weeks before a festive season, outlets should buy more because consumers buy. If you're near a school, people want more sugary drinks, and therefore that's what you should cater on. If you're near homes, people want bigger pack sizes because it's for at-home consumption. If you're near a tourist area, people may want drinks that are chilled versus somewhere else. So there are multiple parameters that we knew would impact. Weather, determines. A big event determines. And so we collected all of this data, and machine learning recommends an order. And that order is a much better order than what was being placed by 90% of the sales force. We tested it, we launched this. Immediately, there was a sales impact that came through. The entire machine learning digitalization happened, and it was absolutely critical, but it happened for a business problem, intangible impact on the ground, and Salesforce now is asking for more. They're coming and saying, I think there is one more problem that we can solve for. Can we address this as well? So this is a great example of a business problem, and solving it required understanding of data sets, understanding of process, and driving change management. So there was a lot of work, but it was solving a business problem. I've seen the exact opposite happen. We need to do something on generative AI. What can we do? Which is an exactly different problem where we are going and saying 15 solutions, pick one. And now you've bought a solution, and you're saying, can we use it somewhere? And the probability of that being successful is then relatively smaller.
Yeah, you're creating another issue in some way. You mentioned talent as an issue in Southeast Asia. What's the matter?
So look, young markets, great talent availability. The challenge is that in a market where there is so much happening, how do you attract young talent to join a traditional FMCG company? A lot of growth is coming from newer roles. How do you make that happen? And even if you can you create that culture where people would want to stay in businesses for a relatively long period of time? And so the struggle, Daniel, that a lot of companies are having is, can we create alternate career paths? Can we be comfortable telling somebody and saying, hey, come to us for 4 years? And maybe that's all we'll need you for. And that's okay. But these 4 years will be remarkably enriching in your life. Daniel, you work with a large number of executives. Christine, you have. How many of us were executives who just stayed in one or two companies for 25, 30 years? Now, that's not going to happen in the future. We will have roles which will be temporary, which will be different. We will recruit from different places. We need to start compensating people differently. If you're hiring a data analyst, how you recruit them, how you manage them, the work from home policy that you deploy for them, the laptops you give them, all of this has to be different. And that requires a different mindset for companies to be able to work. And that's the struggle from a talent perspective. Daniel, that's on the white collar side. There is also struggle on the blue collar part of the business. But I think that's more regulations, legislation led. But it's the white collar one, which is a bit of a structural change that companies will need to think through, especially when you look at all the tech companies looking to get a similar talent, where it's more in tune with the DNA that the younger talent pool will have.
And with all this on the table, so we have growth, digitalization, and talent as the three key issues. If you had to take out your crystal ball, how would you see this evolve in the coming years?
Look, like I said, great believer in the Asia story. For me, very simply, a market which has fundamental growth drivers in place from a demographics perspective is a great market to be. I think what I would like to see more of is industries and businesses now being forced to be really thoughtful in how they want to play in the market space. And, the periods of quick studies, quick tweaks are over, which is by both for the market. I think it would be a great period where a handful of companies that really get their act together, invest time in understanding what's happening in the market, will start really outperforming. And we'll also see, a large number of companies struggle, exit, which I think is also a natural cleanup that happens in any market space. So I'm really excited. I think it will be a interesting journey, difficult for some, but it will give companies a lot more clarity. For a long period of time, we've seen this a little bit of instability, like a little bit of lack of consistency in the Asia story. And I think this is required. I think if you have to be in Asia, you have to be in Asian companies, the way to see it. Leverage your global strengths, but really adapt to what is needed in the market. And I think that's a journey that companies will need to go through.
And when it comes to taking that journey, there you have big GMs and CEOs that have a big responsibility on it. So you already mentioned when, for example, we talk about Indonesia and not Southeast Asia. What else is there that they should be doing right?
Yeah. So this is a tricky one. Look, the buck stops with the GM and the CEOs. There is no doubt about that, right? The problem is, Christine, and having observed many of them quite closely, and some of them great people, there is also a role that the board or the larger management team has to play. Whenever a new person comes into markets, the way I'm explaining them, there is a lot of good legacy and a lot of bad legacy. But as you know, time is always short. You need to start performing and meeting the next year's numbers and targets. And so then we start getting into this perpetual cycle of, let's tweak something. Patience is short, delivery needs to happen. My own sense is I think there are a couple of things that leaders will need to do. One is, it is absolutely important for the CEOs or the GMs in our markets to be thorough and transparent in the positive sense where the local markets and the larger MNCs need to be on one page on what the reality is. This cannot be storytelling to the West. This cannot be simplification by reading an article in the Washington Post and saying this is what in Asia looks like. There is more dynamics around it. So I think that's the most important. Then be really clear about one or two priorities you'll pick. You cannot be doing 15 things and transforming them. So be laser focused on what are one or two things that you're trying to do, and then execute them to excellence. All of this will not get solved in one day. But I think if the board and the leadership are aligned, and we see that in many of our clients, the board and the leadership are aligned, it just gives so much comfort because now you can call things out and you're in sync. You're not trying to manage each other. Then one or two things, don't go after all, don't try and fix everything. It's complex. And then just absolute ruthless, brilliant execution. I think leaders who do these three things are set. And we're seeing many of them in our clients who have gotten these three things right. There are many who have not. And you see those challenges emerging either immediately or getting observed over a short period of time.
How important is for them to have like a social media, let's say, namely LinkedIn presence? Because I know that's something that you and me had chatted about before.
Yeah, so Daniel, I mentioned that briefly. Look, everybody's on social media. You need to be on social media. It's a complex one. We can't. People will need to be on social media, but the fine balance is who is driving the agenda. The agenda cannot be social media driven. And that mindset, which is very natural for all of us who are on social media, we end up doing things for social media. That should not start happening. And I think this is where the PR departments of these companies need to play an important role. Get the communication going, but don't make it about one person. Don't make it about the leader. Make it about the business. But also realize that social media is a short spectrum of the consumers that we serve. And so, the more we realize that, the better decisions we'll make. We run the risk of being social media led. And it's not that people are not doing the right thing. It just adds to the distraction. Because once you comment on something on social media, it then becomes a vicious cycle. You cannot get out of it. You cannot make a bold claim on sustainability, as we've seen some companies do. And then next year, you're not there. And now you've put yourself in a greater risk position. So these are things that need to be a bit more thought through, in my view. What to communicate is one thing, but when and how much is the other thing as well. And I think this is where prudence will help.
Yes, and it's a fine balance that we need to be keeping among also like personal agendas, because it's also people that are posting and they are getting a reaction and they're getting the hype. So there's a lot of challenges that we've described and opportunities when it comes to the Asian market. Do you have like, apart from the one that we already discussed on machine learning, any other examples of how you at Kearney are helping your clients with these challenges?
So look, many examples. As I mentioned, we are currently helping our clients. Daniel, the point you mentioned about, you know, discovering what's the best way to reach trade, which in classic definitions would be a commercial transformation or a route to market problem. And I think here again, theories and frameworks is one. But as you start going into the market, you're looking at who are the best partners. You're now making individual decisions and choices. You're looking at geographical locations and footprints. So there's a lot of, the strategy meeting the reality, that brilliantly practical game that is being played. A lot of focus, Christine, on profitability improvement. And I think I personally find that quite fascinating, because people can think of profitability improvement, productivity improvement as a bad word. If you approach it rightly, this is not about squeezing. This is about sitting back and saying, how do I do much more with what I have? And rightly done, and which a lot of our clients are doing, it is allowing us to ask bold questions. I'll give you an example. We had done work with a very large global client. And we found that 60% of their talent in one function was spending time on transactional, less value-adding activities. This is brilliant talent. This is highly motivated talent. This is highly specialized talent. But that's what they end up doing. So the discussion was not about let's cut headcount. The discussion was, we have this great talent pool, but we are making 60% of them do things that they're not good at. We need the 40% of them to the 40% capacity to become 100% and really start shining. So a lot of these very meaningful conversations are now beginning to happen. And I think clients are now beginning to discover the joy of it. It's really powerful for a large number of the employees, because it's essentially telling them, we want to unlock your full potential. And how can we do that? It's obviously not easy, but we're seeing great success, and we're seeing companies unlock significant value, both productivity, both cost efficiency, and really stepping up. And in any business, a company that makes more money is always better positioned than one that makes less money, because you can invest more, you're more confident, you can grow faster. And so it's also creating a positive cycle in the market space. And we're doing a lot of work in that space, which is quite fascinating to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way of looking at productivity as well. Sometimes we think of it as like, how can we better be organized and so on, but here it's like quite specific of like, let the smart people do the smart things, no? And the other parts, let's find ways of doing them in a different way. So Sid, I think
And Daniel, if I can just add to it, I think the other thing is, in all our businesses, and as we grew up in our ranks, we also know what the unlocks in our own professions were. Right? If I ask myself as a young consultant, I knew what the unlocks were. I think what happens is, it becomes difficult to solve each and every problem at a point of time. Sometimes programs like these, the ones that we run, are great for somebody to come back and put 4 or 5 big, bold choices in front of management and saying, you can do A or you can do B, and B is what will unlock. Right? So one of the things that we also play quite a meaningful role is not about necessarily discovering the problem. Every employee knows, where they're wasting time, but being able to bring that up in a concise fashion, being able to give the choices, give the management teams comfort. Yes, it is feasible. This is how it will happen, and then eventually land it. Also becomes quite meaningful. So it's both about, it's largely about being able to force good choices, which otherwise get hidden. And people keep cribbing, complaints happen, but we don't make a jump shift.
No, and I think that one thing that's very interesting about what you do, and the same that I do, that we interact with a lot of different companies, and you see what people get right, what people get wrong, what decisions we think they'll get right and then they get wrong, because it's all very contingent with the context. But
absolutely,
with everything that you've done until now, and also seeing your clients getting it right and getting it wrong, if you had to go back to yourself when you was first starting to work, what would be that one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Buy Bitcoins. I would say two, Daniel. I think maybe a personal one and a professional one. I think on the personal side, I think build a fitness routine. For somebody who has always enjoyed playing sports, I've always not planned well. And therefore, once you're not in a habit, it becomes very difficult to keep that momentum going on. So I think that would be one advice. And I see a lot of young consultants these days, which is great to see, have a fitness routine.
You need to tell us. You need to tell us, what is your fitness routine, Sid?
No, so exactly. So right now it all goes for a toss, right? Like I love playing badminton twice a week. But then because you're in your head, you're flexible, then you end up, changing your routine. And I see many people who get more work perhaps done than I do, but because they're so strict on their routine, they're able to follow up with it. So which is why I think building a routine and in some ways not overly compromising is one advice that I would give myself when I was younger. I think the second is see if you can move locations and live in different parts of the world. I lived in India. I've lived in Singapore. Luckily, in my profession, I do end up traveling quite a lot and spending long times. And I see the difference in my own experience of a country versus when I traveled there as just a tourist or a backpacker. But living there allows you to experience a very different culture. I get to do a little bit of that in frequent work travels, going to places that I wouldn't otherwise as a tourist or as a guest in that country. But I wish I would have done more of that when we didn't have kids. Now my wife and I have 2 kids, so life revolves around them, which makes everything a bit more which has less flexibility in some of these cases. But those would be the two.
This was Sid Pathak, Senior Partner, Head of Consumer Industries Practice, Asia Pacific at Kearney. Christina, lots to unpack here. So I'll let you do the heavy lifting. What are your key takeaways from this conversation?
A lot of things to unpack. Indeed, I have like 4 pages full of notes here from Kearney being the brilliantly practical mind, let's say, to their customers, which is a balance that I absolutely loved, the way that Sid put it.
Yeah, absolutely. That even if he's like a senior partner, he's still putting the work in himself to know what's happening with his clients. I think that's like a must practically.
Absolutely, because you need to bring the brains to it, right? And to have the theory, but unless you can also get down to the heavy lifting and doing the actual work and understanding how things are going to be applied in the real, let's say, market reality, that's actually how you can strike that balance. And I really like how we talked about all the different FMCG companies in Asia and their priorities, right? So he did mention that right now growth is number 1 priority, but if you were to go a few years back, it would be like, how do I enter that market? Then figuring out how do I strike the right profitability equation for my company there. And then you had this really big digital boom, and then trying to get that resilience during COVID. And now we're back to growth, which is ultimately not an easy thing to do, as you have. I love that he mentioned that you have all the local players in the market. You have big FMCGs playing across multiple ones, but the local players, they are playing the game for the specific markets and they are full in. And that's something that's not easy to tackle, right?
Yeah, and I think that's like it's interesting because like the challenge for FMCGs in Asia are so different to the ones in Europe. Like in Europe, there's no question of like what's the proper approach when it comes to route to market. Whereas in Asia, it's all over the place a little bit. Like even like the regional structure. How can you compete with local players when you have like a regional structure, right? So you need a strong like local entity, which maybe you think you can't afford. Then what distributors do you work with? Do you work with a big one? Do you work with a lot of small ones? Do you do a mix of both, which is normally the case? How much do you invest in digital now as well? That's also a big thing. Like how many like specific Gen AI or machine learning trials can you do in each market when you have like a global structure and global brands?
I guess that, as Sid mentioned, it all ends up about the partnerships that you can have in the market. So tackling that first part with regards to your distribution model and changing also your language. It's not Southeast Asia that you're competing in. It's Indonesia specifically, because you play store by store. You're competing in every store at the time. When it comes to digitalization, I love the part of the conversation we had there. As he mentioned, there are two, let's say, major pillars that he sees the opportunity. One is, what is the driving force behind digitalization? So there is this one thing where it says, here is a bunch of solutions that our IT has developed. Let's find some problems to apply them. Or you have a CEO who's like, hey, everybody's doing something about digital. We must do something as well. So ultimately, you need to start by saying, here's a business problem that I have. Let's figure out how can technology help me solve that. And then change management will take it from there. And then the other part that he mentioned a couple of times that I liked and I hadn't really paid attention to before is, you shouldn't end up playing for the galleries or the likes. So indeed, social media, at the end of the day, it's not just a thing for individuals. Companies are there. Companies are posting and getting likes and reactions, but this should never be something that you use to help shape your agenda.
Absolutely. And also he talked about, look at 1-2 priorities and not 15 and execute them to excellence. So that's one other thing. Like, if I think of specific companies that have a strong implementation in Asia, maybe they've worked a lot on like having an amazing route to market for a long time and just being in every point of sale, right? That happened with some beverage companies, for example, which are renowned to be very good at route to market, instead of like trying to be the best in route to market, marketing, digital, etc., etc.
Yes, absolutely. So as Sid mentioned, you need to, first of all, be able to get your reality on a page, like really understand where it is you're operating and put it in simple words. And then from there, just 1 to 2 things maximum, you need to be laser focused on what you're going to go after. And that part you need to put your full force behind and execute as excellently as you can.
Exactly. One last thing, by the way, I thought it was interesting when he mentioned about the high percentage of time that people dedicate to transactional tasks. Like, I think there's just so much low-hanging fruit there. It's crazy.
That was one of the examples he mentioned about the company they're working with. So when it comes to increasing, let's say, the efficiencies in a company, it's not necessarily that you're just trying, to cut headcounts, but it's really about taking your smartest people and giving them something rewarding to do that it has the maximum impact possible. And for sure, there is a lot of value in doing this kind of exercises and getting the maximum out of what your organization can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this was super interesting. Thanks again to Sid for joining us. Thanks to our audience for joining us too. Remember, if you've enjoyed this episode and others we've done, you've heard me say this before, please leave us a review. It will take you 2 minutes and really help us a ton. We give this podcast out for free, so not asking for much. Thanks, Christina, as well. Have a great one. See you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys.